It's very nice to see everyone again in New Year. And on behalf of the SMS Strategy and Entrepreneurship Interest Group, I'm very happy to introduce Professor Rebecca Henderson to you. Professor Henderson is one of the 25 university professors at Harvard, a research fellow of the MBER and a fellow of both the British Academy and of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Over the past 30 years, she has written and published extensively on the topics of innovation and organizational change. And in particular, her research explores how the private sector can help build a more sustainable economy, focusing on the relationships between organizational purpose, innovation, and productivity in high-performance organizations. And today, we're very glad to have her here to talk about her new book, Reimaging Capitalism. It's this book I'm holding in my hand. This book has been recently shortlisted for the FT McKinsey 2020 Business Book of the Year Award. Without further ado, Rebecca, please take it away.
Wesley, thank you very much. I am honored and delighted to be your inaugural speaker for 2021. And I would like to thank everyone who has tuned in today. Life on Zoom is sometimes intense. I think we're all feeling under pressure. And so I really appreciate your taking the time to hear a little bit about my research today. My plan is to talk for about half an hour and then for us to go to Q&A and open discussion. And more broadly, I don't disappear after the webinar. If I can help you in your teaching or research in any way, please feel free to reach out to me. I think this is really an unusual moment in capitalism, in the world. And we all need to support each other as much as we can. So, before I begin showing you slides, let me tell you how I came to write a book called Reimaging Capitalism. Some of you may be familiar with my earlier research, which focused broadly on the question of innovation. I was the Eastman Kodak Professor of Management at MIT for many years. That was a coincidence, but a deeply ironic one, because my work focused on the difficulties large firms faced in reacting to technological change. And about 15 years ago, I started to work with energy companies. I had spent a lot of time reading about climate change, and my initial thought was that I should just quit, that the problem was so enormous that what was I doing? I mean, I was teaching MBAs for a living, and the world was burning. What could I do? What difference could I make? My friends working for NGOs and activist groups persuaded me to stay on at MIT to help fund the first course on business and sustainability and to really focus on what business could do. And so I found myself teaching this course and working with large energy companies. And they were having difficulty with change. And it became clear that the single thing that would really accelerate the transition would be a price for carbon emissions. That, just to take an example, if I were to buy, let's assume for a moment that I'm holding $10 worth of coal-fired electricity in my hands. That's a cloud of electrons that would power my cell phone for roughly 10 years. Which sounds like a pretty good deal. 10 years, $10, not a bad deal. The issue, though, is that the real cost of this $10 worth of electrons is not $10, but something more like 26. When you burn coal to generate electricity, you generate all kinds of toxins that go into the air, mercury and lead and small particulates, that my colleagues in the School of Public Health tell me kill literally millions of people every year. Just here in the US, they drive up health costs by hundreds of millions of dollars every year. So the real cost of the health effects of burning that coal is about $8. And then burning coal generates a huge amount of carbon dioxide, which drives climate change, which is causing already, think about what's happening in Texas right now, is already causing immense damage and hardship, and will continue to do so for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Who knows what the cost of that damage is? But my friends in economics who've done a ton of work on this tell me that a conservative estimate is about $8. for the amount of coal required to generate $10 worth of coal-fired electricity. So this $10 worth of coal-fired electricity is causing $16 worth of damage, which means it's incredibly incorrectly priced. If we charge the real cost, so that would be $26, think how easy it would be if you're a renewable company to displace coal. Coal would more than double, coal-fired electricity would more than double in price. And here we go, we've got renewables, we've got a carbon transition, we're off to the races. So forgive me for those of you who, this is really obvious, let's price externalities, the market will work better. But as I was working with energy companies, I was struck by the fact that we were going through so many hoops to justify investment in renewables. Remember, this is 15 years ago. And if we had a price for carbon, it would be easy. So this is how I got interested in reimagining capitalism. We the answer, the textbook is democratically accountable, a free market, and a vigorous and engaged civil society. That's the answer. Or any form of political history, it's clear, I believe, that strong, prosperous societies rest on those three foundations. And the trouble is we focus so much of our attention on the free market that our societies are now out of balance. The answer is to rebalance them. Easy, check. Well, what does business have to do with that? Clearly, we need a massive political and cultural movement worldwide in order to rebalance things. Can business help? This is the problem that has been obsessing me for the last 15 years, ever since that first revelation. And I have been working with businesses on the ground, trying to find a way in which the local actions that business might do, changing the light bulbs, reducing waste, hiring more people of color, how these local actions might add up to broader systemic change. And that's what the book's about. So let me show you the book in 25 minutes. And you know, before I do that, just doing some basic housekeeping here. Okay. Share screen, and my apologies, just taking me a moment here. You would have thought after all the teaching that we have done on Zoom that this would be easy to do. Here we go. Here it is. Okay. Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. Why business is really important, the 5 steps to systemic change, and implications for research and teaching. That's where we're going. So why business? The problems I outlined to you, climate change, inequality, accelerating technical change, exclusion, these are public goods problems. Why should business try and fix them? Indeed, is it even plausible to think that business might try and fix them? When I was trying to sell this book, I talked to a publisher in New York, whose name you would know, and he looked at me and said, "Rebecca, business saves the world? Really? Do you read the papers?" So I understand this is a wildly unlikely idea. Why do I persist? So the problems we face are absolutely enormous. To another audience, I would give you backup slides against each of these points. Climate change is real, it's coming very fast. and will cause enormous human suffering, initially to the most vulnerable. It's also terrible for business. The ex-governor of the Bank of England is going around telling people that it threatens the stability of the entire financial system. And I think there's a lot of evidence to believe that that is right. We also see accelerating inequality in many parts of the world, and with it a rising feeling of rage and anger, both on the left and the right, that is playing into institutions that are failing, or at least under enormous stress and declining trust in institutions across the world. Edelman suggests that less than half of the world's population believe capitalism is working for them. A majority of people under 30 in the US say they prefer socialism to capitalism. They probably mean they want decent health care, but still, if you're a strong capitalist, as I am, it's very nervous making. And we've seen governments failing or becoming gridlocked in many places. So the first best solution is just to rebuild our institutions. As I said, I think there is overwhelming evidence that successful, prosperous societies maintain a balance between good democratic government, strong free markets, and in the middle, the institutions that hold that balance, the independent rule of law, a respected and independent free press, respect for minority rights, a voice for labor. That a healthy society, these actors hold each other in balance, such that, for example, externalities are properly priced, there is genuine freedom of opportunity, and firms cannot write the rules in their own favor. So that's, I believe, the end state. That's where we're trying to get to. We're trying to rebuild our inclusive institutions, institutions that can focus on the long term and the entire community to solve these problems. So why talk about business? Well, the reason to talk about business is that our institutions are under enormous stress. Top left here, you'll see some photograph of the Brexit protests. I am British, as you might be able to tell. I view Brexit as my home nation shooting itself aggressively in the foot. I understand why it happened. I understand the rage and the anger, but whoa, what a thing to do. And the bottom right image, of course, is of the recent riots at the US Capitol. So I think waiting around and hoping that governments will fix these problems is a recipe for disaster. So 5 steps to systemic change: creating shared value, building cooperation, rewiring the capital markets, rebuilding our institutions, and changing the normative frame. This book is 15 years of research. It's quite ambitious. But let me give you a sense of what I'm about here. My fundamental premise is that there is a strong collective economic case for addressing these problems. But it's going to be very hard to make money in a world where most of the world's great coastal cities are underwater and millions of angry people are migrating north as the harvests fail. It's going to be tough to make money if much of the world's population comes to believe that the rich and the white are trashing the planet and keeping the productivity gains for themselves and leaving everyone else out. That is a recipe for long-term disaster. So collectively, if we could imagine all the CEOs in the world, or let's just take the top 1,000 who between them control some bizarre fraction of economic activity, let's just suppose we had those 1,000 CEOs in a single room. If we could persuade them to act together and to promise to act together, would they have a collective case for addressing these problems? I think they would. So that's my fundamental promise, my fundamental premise. I think what we face is a collective action problem, that the institutions that humans have evolved to solve collective action problems, local organizations and governments principally, but also civil society, are failing us for reasons we could talk more about. But essentially, our collective institutions are failing us. We have a market that is an unparalleled source of prosperity and freedom. I am a huge fan of capitalism, but capitalism unchecked is about me right now. That's what it does. And so it's not designed as a collective instrument. So how do we get those 1,000 CEOs, or if you think about it, all the economic activity on the planet focused on addressing these problems? So here's my answer. We start with the shared value opportunity. This is a phrase developed by my colleagues, Michael Porter and Mark Kramer. And the essential idea here is that there is a strong business case for doing the right thing, and you can make money at the same time. At Harvard, we have more than 300 cases, many of them at billion-dollar scales, laying out these business models. And I'm sure many of you who work in this area are familiar with this idea that, yes, it is possible to make money and do the right thing. And I think that's a really important starting point. Why? Because when firms act, they demonstrate that action is possible. They demonstrate that there's money to be made. They drive technology down the learning curves. They change what consumers expect, and ultimately lay the foundations for smart regulation. So these individual firms moving can make a huge difference. Let's just think about Walmart, for example. When Walmart committed to going fossil fuel free, carbon free in 2005, which at the time was really quite revolutionary, this is Walmart after all, they did it only to the degree that it was profitable. But they found unbelievable opportunities to take money, to save money right through the value chain, including taking more than $1 billion a year in profit straight to the bottom line by making their trucking fleet more efficient. And the example of a firm like Walmart saying, hey, come on in. The water's great. There's lots of money to be saved here, has helped thousands of other firms begin to do what they can on a local level. Change is hard. People sometimes say to me, well, if it's so easy to make money and do good at the same time, then why is it everyone's not doing it? And here I draw on the first 20 years of my career, and I say change is hard. Everybody is used to what they're doing. They deny the reality of what's happening. Oh, it can't be that changing the light bulbs is that profitable. I mean, I don't believe it. They say that doing new things will be costly and difficult, and hey, we're fine as we are. And last but not least, even if you can persuade me there's a business case, I'm busy. I can't get it done. I spent my career studying this problem, and what I think I learned is the answer is to reframe the purpose of the firm. What I saw in firm after firm that managed to make these kinds of transitions is that they had a purpose beyond simply making money. But making money was a means to an end, not an end in itself. Now, let's be clear. I have more than 30 years cumulative experience on major public boards. I understand it's important to satisfy your investors. But that doesn't mean that's the goal of the firm. And I think, and this has been the subject of my research with Bob Gibbons in more recent years, that it's quite legal to be purpose-driven and has very significant economic effects. So I won't go here in detail, but when you unpack what a manager's legal duties really are, they are care, candor, and loyalty. It is totally legal, except in a few well-defined situations described in the US by Revlon and Unical duties and similar exceptions elsewhere. But as a generalization, there is no legal duty to maximize profits. Now, often you have to make money and do well in order to survive in the competitive marketplace, but it's completely legal to say, my goal is to drive the carbon transition, or my goal is to create fabulous jobs for my community. And of course, I will meet my obligations to my investors as I do that. Now, why might that be important? Because what I think I saw, forgive me, in my research, is that purpose can generate the vision, the energy, and the trust necessary to drive change. I recently published a paper in Management Science summarizing my view of the research that underlines this rather sweeping statement. Each one of the arrows on this diagram summarizes a ton of empirical research in social psychology, behavioral economics, psychology itself. I think we have very good reason to believe that the embrace of purpose increases performance. Now, when I say performance, I mean creativity and engagement and innovativeness. I do not necessarily mean financial performance. I am not making the claim that purpose is uniformly correlated with financial performance. This is a huge subject that we could go into a lot of detail on. What I'm suggesting, and this comes particularly from my work with Professor Bob Gibbons on high performance work practices, is that investing for the long term, building shared vision and beliefs, clearly demonstrating authenticity and creating meaning at work, and identity and prosociality builds trust. And trust, along with alignment and intrinsic motivation, both of which are great to have, but trust allows you to develop relational contracts, which allow you to develop high performance work practices. Now, being purpose-driven is sometimes expensive. So that's why I'm saying this is about catalyzing change, not the royal road to instant riches, but that this having purpose is what will drive firms to take the risks necessary to create shared value. Now, it's clear that action by individual firms will not be enough. Walmart is amazing. They changed millions of light bulbs, but it's fairly clear that while there are business cases for doing the right thing in a wide variety of circumstances, they won't get you all the way. In the case of energy, for example, most of the firms I work with find that they can reduce their energy use by 30 to 40% on an NPV positive basis, but that after that it gets pretty hard. Now, as renewables have come down in price, in many parts of the world, they're now cheaper as new capacity than fossil fuel-based plants. That constraint is starting to break, but it's still difficult. If your local grid is coal-fired or natural gas-powered, as it is here for us in Massachusetts, it's hard to kick the habit completely. It's clear it's going to be possible, but you can't do it on your own. Similarly, if you want to diversify your workforce or to embrace a high road employment system where you pay people more, it's infinitely easier to do if your competitors are doing the same thing. So we need to learn to act collectively. And in my book, I assert that we have examples of firms solving the prisoner's dilemma. Building on the pioneering work of Eleanor Ostrom, those of you who know it will be familiar with her example of lobster fishers in Maine. I look at other examples where firms have come together to cooperate for the good of the group to create essentially public goods. The International Chamber of Commerce, for example, is a completely voluntary, self-regulatory body that controls international trade. If the ICC wished to enforce something that looked like a carbon price, in principle it could. And in the book, I look at a wide variety of firms that are trying to do this, all the way from Nike and other. So shared value is critical. We need to adopt, we need to understand that the purpose of the firm is to solve public problems profitably, to contribute to the health of the whole, and that maximizing profits is a means to that end, not an end in itself. We need to learn to act cooperatively. So I give many examples in my book. Fortunately, there are several examples in the world of firms working together to make doing the right thing pre-competitive. So, for example, take the case of Unilever. They were keen to use only deforestation-free palm oil because their brand was being threatened by activists who were linking Unilever to the destruction of primary forests in Indonesia and Malaysia. So Unilever wanted to use deforestation-free palm oil, but it was too expensive to use if the firm was to use it alone. It would put them at a competitive disadvantage. So they reached out to their competitors, formed through the Consumer Goods Forum, formed an agreement that more than 60% of the world's publicly traded palm oil would commit to buying only deforestation-free oil. Similarly, impressive commitments have been seen in the apparel industry, in IT, in mining and minerals, and in a range of other industries. So this is very exciting. 5 years ago, I thought that self-regulation and mutual cooperation might actually solve these problems. I no longer believe that, because this self-regulation is inherently unstable. It's very hard to keep everyone in the coalition, and it is always tempting to cheat. So efforts are not stable. We need to look elsewhere. Where can we look? We can rewire finance. What does this mean? Huge topic. Next slide. The first thing to do is to develop new measures. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the ferment around so-called environmental, social, and governance metrics. These are incredibly important for at least two reasons. The first is that it enables investors and others to hold firms to account. More and more investors are seeing that addressing these problems is linked to long-term profitability. Many investors believe it's in their own long-term interest, or they want to help make a difference too. So they're pushing firms to move. If we don't have metrics, we can't tell, the firms can't tell, no one else can tell if they're making progress. So ESG metrics are absolutely central. This doesn't mean they're easy. It took more than 50 years to develop modern financial accounts. It will certainly take time to develop replicable, auditable, material metrics that capture non-financial measures of performance. But once we have them, they will both help firms improve and make it easier to enforce cooperation. Because if you're trying to enforce a cooperative equilibrium, you need to be able to observe defection and punish it. So new measures are critically important. Next slide. The other thing that might make an enormous difference is so-called universal investors. Capital is now so concentrated that the largest pools of capital cannot diversify away from the systemic risks that they face. So this is a quote from Hiro Mizuno, the chief investment officer of the Japanese pension fund, the largest pension fund in the world, the Japanese government pension fund. They own more than 1% of the world's equities and 1% of almost everything else. For the GPIF, Mizuno-san came to believe that it was in his fiduciary duty to address climate change and social inclusion, that these were the major risks to his ability to deliver pensions over the long term. He has been pushing his asset managers aggressively. Those of you who are familiar with Larry Fink's letters in this area, Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, and he's been talking a lot about the fact that firms should become purpose-driven and focus on these larger issues. Hiro is Larry's largest customer. It is not a coincidence. So capital is so concentrated that the largest investors are starting to internalize the economic case for action. So with strong ESG metrics, with coalitions among investors, the rewiring of finance might be centrally important in solving these problems. Just informally, I think it might get us climate change. I don't think it will get us inequality or rebalancing of government, but potentially very powerful. Last but not least, can business help rebuild our institutions? I have 2 minutes to talk about this. Let me just say that I think it could. We're already seeing, I think business is increasingly aware that having divided, polarized, dysfunctional government is very bad for business. This is a very, very rough empirical analysis, just here to make the point. But we know, I think, that those countries that have free markets combined with free politics have grown much more quickly than firms with more complicated, more extractive, than countries with more extractive institutions. Next slide. And we're seeing in a small scale firms playing a significant role working with local governments to address public goods problems. In the book, I talk about Minneapolis, which is an interesting case, not perfect, but where the senior business leadership of the city has been deeply engaged with the city and state leadership in trying to address problems in education and health for many years. You see it in other cities like Columbus. We are seeing coordinated political action through coalitions like We Are Still In to push for collective action on climate. And we're seeing increasingly business leaders stepping up and saying, we have a strong interest in the health of the democracy, in the ability of everyone to vote, in the capacity of the bureaucracy, in NGOs like Leadership Now and Time to Vote and American Progress that are pulling together business leaders to be a voice saying, free markets need free politics. We need to rebalance the system. Historically, next slide, there have been historical moments where the private sector has played a fundamental role in rebalancing the system. In the book, I describe these three examples: Denmark in the 1890s, Germany post-World War II, and Mauritius in 1968, where a coalition between business and the government and labor was able to build an agreement that none of them liked a lot, but all of them could live with, that has since proved to be a very enduring foundation for long-term growth. So that's the book. In summary, 5 steps to systemic change. All we need to do is create shared value, build cooperation, rewire finance, rebuild our institutions, and oh yes, by the way, change how we think about the purpose of business. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry about the Zoom problems.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Audience, let's open everything up for Q&A. So if you have a question, simply raise your hand and I will try my best to get to everyone. Second. All right, so and I'm going to unmute you to allow you to talk to Rebecca directly. So the first question is from Johan. I am going to allow you to talk right now, Johan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
My name is Johan Wallin. First of all, thank you very much, Professor Henderson. I have already read your book, and I have been a great fan of your architectural thinking since the early 90s. And I have been a member of the Strategic Management Society since 1989. But I actually never worked for university. I've done my studies and I've been doing practice work. And I established an association called the World Alliance for Low Carbon Cities back in 2012 in collaboration with Tsinghua University. So this brings me into these very practical challenges from a global perspective, that when we talk about these sort of architectural innovations that you are raising also in the book, that you didn't go into in the presentation now, we see that there are underlying sort of thinking sort of in the way how to balance between the society and business. And for the moment, my feeling is that the world is more going into silos with their own interpretation, like you were referring to Brexit. I'm living in Finland. We have a challenge here with our neighbor to the east, which has been doing pretty not so nice things the last couple of weeks. So how do you see this sort of the geopolitical situation to be able to have those changes that you are asking for? My feeling is that you are actually hinting in the book that we need some global collective effort as well. And we cannot just do this on a regional basis.
So, Johan, thank you for your kind words about my work, and thank you for your own work. One of the great pleasures of having a few chances to talk about the book has been meeting people like you who are driving action on the ground. So thank you very much. You're right, of course, that to solve these very large problems will, in the end, I think, require collective action at a global scale. And in many countries, the political winds are blowing in perhaps the wrong direction. I hope, I'm not saying, oh, yes, this will certainly happen, it's a done deal. But my hope is that the emergence of a collective sense amongst the business leaders of the world, that they were willing to put real resources behind, that it was important to address these issues on a global scale, would be helpful to building collective political consensus. You could imagine that happening in climate. I know how hard this is, but we're seeing more and more cities and regions make commitments to climate goals. We're seeing more business leaders pressure governments to adopt climate regulation. We're seeing business coalitions play an important role at the COP negotiations. So, of course, business can't do it alone, but my hope is that it can be an important voice in the discussion at the global level, and that in its work with employees and customers, it can help communicate the importance of these issues. Business is one of the few non-partisan, moderately trusted voices in many societies. For many people, this is the Edelman data, for many people, their employer is the voice they trust most. And when your employer says that climate change is real, that it can be addressed for a reasonable cost, and that we can build a prosperous future if we do make progress in this direction, I am hopeful that that will contribute to the political and cultural pressure that's necessary to also lead to global change.
Okay, next up, we have Andrew Ward. I am going to allow you to talk right now, Andrew. Could everyone just keep your questions succinct from now on? Thank you.
I'll try and keep my answers short too.
Sure, thank you, Rebecca. Andrew Ward from Lehigh University here. I wonder if you could talk about the role of what we might call convening or coordinating organizations, so places like the World Economic Forum, the UN Global Compact, the Business Roundtable. What do you see as their role, and do we need another kind of convening organization to be able to enable business to move in the direction you've been talking about?
Super important question. All the historical examples, for all the historical examples I looked at, and I looked at change in South Africa and Chile and a number of other places too, political change that was catalyzed by business was catalyzed through collective organizations, business associations, some kind of collective convening. Whether the set that you just reeled off is the right set, I do not know. But something like the Chamber of Commerce is almost certainly incredibly important. It has to be wide enough to pull people together and to be able to really speak for business and to be a respected voice of business. So that's what we need. I don't know which of the organizations we have is going to be able to move most successfully into that role.
Thank you. Next up, we have Adrian Hobart.
Hi, Adrian Hobart here from London University. I'd like to ask you a little bit about the question of, well, various types of vested interests. But one of the externalities you don't mention, or haven't mentioned so far, is the externality which comes with unfairness, which arguably a reaction to that would be the, sorry, are you having difficulty hearing me?
That's better, thank you.
Okay. the externality of unfairness, which you don't mention specifically in your discussion so far, is the part of Brexit, for example, can be traced back to that. Now, the question is, how do you handle the kind of discourse that goes, well, these solutions that you are expecting are just going to entrench existing unfairnesses? And by asking business to fix it, you are essentially giving more power to the overpaid people at the top of such businesses.
Absolutely. I have many friends on the left who think what I'm proposing is extremely dangerous. That to say that business should get more involved in politics is a huge problem, when arguably political involvement by the most powerful corporations is one of the reasons we're facing the difficulties we face. So I completely get that question. I have two answers, neither of them entirely satisfactory. One is, I'm worried there aren't many alternatives. And my hope is that for business to step up and say, we should do the right thing, will make it harder for some other businesses to say, well, you know, it's in my immediate interest to deny the reality of climate change and drive wages to the bottom. And yeah, my workplace is a little bit unsafe, but it's very profitable. So partly I am hoping to really change the conversation, that a lot of firms have been able to say, my duty is to make money, make money, make money, don't bother me. I want to bother them. I want it to be unacceptable to say, I'm happy to fund climate denialism because it's profitable. So in that sense, I'm trying to change the broader conversation about the nature and role of businesses to make it less acceptable to corrupt the process. The other reason I think this might be important is that I really do think we have significant institutional and democratic problems. Perhaps because I'm in the US, I see them particularly clearly here. But to persuade some segment of the business elite that a democracy is a fundamental foundation for prosperity, and that no, we shouldn't drown government in the bathtub, would be a huge step forward. My number one ask of senior CEOs when I meet them is transparency on political spending, a rollback of Citizens United, so restrictions on political spending, and full support for democratic elections. And I think having business say that and commit to it might well be helpful.
Next up with Mario.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi. Honor to meet you, by the way. I'm a big fan of your work as well. I'm at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, also a fellow European, though. I think most of the folks we've heard are European. I'm from the Netherlands. I have a few questions, but I'll focus on one. I see the great book in your bookcase behind you, The Great Leveler, by Scheidel, and I was wondering, given how incredibly difficult it is, what you're saying, the coordination across so many economic actors, what are your thoughts on what the Great Leveler is saying, right? That maybe this might not be possible without some huge undesirable punctuation in the form of revolution and things like that. Do you think it would get to that, as maybe we're seeing in some parts of the world? Thank you.
So for those of you who haven't read The Great Leveler, it's a fantastic book. It basically says the only times we've seen major reallocation of political power and wealth is after wars or famines or real disasters. And it's a look back historically. So Mario, let me answer in a couple of ways. Firstly, some of the problems we face have technological solutions. If we can gear up the private sector to begin to work aggressively on those solutions, that can only help. So, you know, I taught at MIT for 20 years. I think that we have the technology to address the environmental problems we face. that we need to scale it, roll it out, but we can handle the problem of waste and water and climate change. So I think pushing really hard on this agenda has that potential benefit. To your bigger question, do I think we might need smash ups before we see real change? I hope not, but I think it's possible. I think, 18 months ago when I was talking about this work, people would look at me and go, Rebecca, I mean, really, people with pitchforks are going to arrive and break things? Well, they're starting to arrive and they're breaking things. And so I sometimes think about this work as preparing our students to live in a world that I think will be much more contentious, place much heavier demands on business. And part of what I'm trying to do is try and contribute to a conversation about what is the role of business as our societies start to come under enormous stress, and to create a conversation where yeah, I do have a role as a business leader to play in responding to these kind of very difficult moments. All three of the historical moments that I describe in my book come after smash-ups. In Mauritius, it was riots in the streets, 600 people killed. In Germany, it was World War II. In Denmark, people sometimes say, and no disrespect to anyone of Danish extraction on the phone, the reason Denmark works so well is somehow these Danes have these unique character that allows them to cooperate. Well, I think the Danes are pretty much like the rest of us, but in the 19th century, they lost two major wars. The economy was really suffering. And one of the lead industrialists said, we've got to find a better way to do this. And, made the first step towards what has become the Danish cooperative system. So, Mari, that's an unsatisfactory answer, but that's as close as I can get.
Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, hi. My name is Tim Folta. I'm at University of Connecticut and chair of the Strategic Management Division of the Academy of Management. The things you're talking about, the important things you're talking about, have implications for us as educators. What are a few implications for how we revise our teaching to address these things?
So, Tim, I hesitate to generalize. There are so many great people working in this space, but I'll tell you a little bit about what we've been doing at Harvard, perhaps as a contribution to the debate. So we teach many elective courses, shared value. I teach one on Reimaging Capitalism, impact investing. So for the students who are interested in these issues, we try and use a lot of concrete business cases to show that there is a business case for participating in new kinds of ways, and that might add up to something larger. So that's in the elective curriculum. In the core curriculum, we're trying hard to open up the conversation around the purpose of the firm. Our students, I don't know if this is true for you, they seem to arrive believing that the only goal of the firm is maximizing short-term shareholder value. And so we teach fiduciary duties, we unpack what they are, we teach stakeholder versus shareholder, the weaknesses and strengths.
Rebecca, I think you're freezing up again. Would you repeat, maybe turn off your video and repeat the last 20 seconds, 20 or 30 seconds of what you said? Thank you.
Sure. So in the required curriculum, we're trying to open up the conversation about what the purpose of the firm is. Look, I'm not trying to sell products, but we have technical notes on the purpose of the firm, fiduciary duties, managers and market capitalism, which is really an exploration of the idea that maximizing shareholder value only maximizes welfare and markets are being fair. Really trying to give students the tools to understand that they have more freedom of action. We're writing case on the spot in terms of everyone around you thinks you should raise wages and save the world. Well, like you have payroll to make. What should you do? And so trying to problematize the kind of do good, do well. Oh, it's easy. It's not easy. try to give them a sense of what it means as a manager to make these decisions in real time. And we're trying to infiltrate these ideas into every course in the curriculum. So I'm now senior enough that many of my friends are running the other core courses. I now run the core course in leadership, where we're really sort of putting this material in, but we try and link to production and marketing and finance and entrepreneurship because, and here's the exciting thing, these issues are coming up everywhere. It's not hard to make the connections. The idea that the world is shaking and these major risks are changing the landscape in industry after industry, that's not a heavy lift. And so we have cases in every course. In marketing, should you Colin Kaepernick, how do we think about diversity and the brand, and really trying to drive it into the core curriculum.
Hi, Rebecca. We'll end the presentation with two more questions. One's from Vernon and one's from Jim Walsh. So maybe if you can give quicker answers, that would be very nice.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. So Vernon's question is as follows, because he cannot talk right now. But trust is an important part of the development of shared value. How do you propose corporations and governments rebuild the lost trust you mentioned, and how do people know if they can trust? What is the core definition of trust you're using?
In a minute. Oh, Vernon, I want to shower you with my academic papers. Send me an email. 30-second answer. By making the first move, by making costly, irreversible commitments to doing the right thing. That's what I think comes leaping out of the literature. So Toyota's commitment to lifetime employment, for example, is a classic example of a costly commitment. And it pushes them, it gives them an economic incentive to follow through on their commitments. That's why I think we live in a world where there's a dual equilibrium, low trust and high trust firms, because building high trust is expensive. It requires making these kinds of commitments and sticking with them over an extended period of time.
Thank you, Rebecca. So next up is Jim Walsh.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Jim. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yep. Hi, Rebecca. This is a ridiculous question to ask with 45 seconds to go, but let me try. I fully appreciate, and I know you do too, that we are talking about institutions and firms here, and maybe even the problems themselves as social facts, and that is, they exist independent of any individuals that are part and parcel of those institutions, firms, and problems. Still, there are 7+ billion people in the world, individuals, living their lives. Can you just say a word or point this in the direction of your intuition about what we as individuals can do as we encounter these kinds of grand challenges and problems as we try to make the world a better place?
Sure. The image that works for me is we can all be pebbles in the avalanche. No hero is going to arrive on a white horse. We need an avalanche of change from millions of people. And who knows where the pebbles will start rolling. But, we are very fortunate as a community. Together, we teach tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students. They are so eager to make a difference and to address these issues, but they don't know where to start. And we can help them think about what they can do as business people, as consumers, as citizens, to start this ball rolling. Jim, you know more about this than I do, but my reading of, do we know what causes social change? We do not. Does it require thousands of people to start moving with passion in the same direction? Yes, it does. We can help be part of that.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for a wonderful presentation, despite the technical issues. It was truly wonderful to have you, and I want to thank you on behalf of the entire community here. Thank you very much.
Wesley, thank you. I'm honored and delighted to be here, and I apologize for the technology problems.